Hi, this is Rosemary, and we are going to lay out a bag today. Now, the technique I'm teaching you is not like any other you've ever seen. It's very, very primitive. It doesn't use extra things like netting. We don't cut the wool. I'm going to teach you to lay it out, and I'm going to teach you how to do edges, because then you'll be able to do more complex articles, such as vests and hats, without cutting. The first thing we're going to make is a bag, because that's the easiest thing to make. I've got my biodegradable soap, and I've already cut out my pattern. This is not the size this will be. This will come out much smaller, probably about anywhere from a quarter to a third of a size smaller than this bag that we make. So right now I'm going to lay this down just to kind of eyeball it. And we want to make sure that we have a dry tray here. I got a little water on it. We want to make sure we have a dry tray and dry wool to start. We've got our nice carded wool right here, and we're going to start laying out this wool. The technique I use to lay out the wool is called the crisscross method. And by the way, in case you haven't noticed, when you've looked at the other pieces of progress to this process that I've showed you, notice I haven't washed this wool. The Navajos never washed this wool because it felt so well. They would spin their wool and then wash it and dye it. This wool is not washed. It will become clean through the felting process. I've tried to keep it debris free as I collect it and as I card it. But as you can see, there's still dirt in it from place to place. Notice that I am placing this wool in an up and down pattern. We are going to use what's called the crisscross method, where we go back and forth. This pattern also, if you'll notice, I'm holding down the wool and I'm pulling it to make sure that I have nice wispy edges here. That's so important because we want the wool to intertwine like this. We don't want to have blunt edges coming up like this together, so we don't want to ever fold unless we're creating a blunt edge. And so as we're laying out the wool right now, we want nice wispy edges that are going to intertwine. And I'm putting them first this direction. I use a lot of my senses when I lay out my wool. This helps me make sure that I don't have any holes or thin spots in my wool. One of the reasons why I don't like to use netting is because I like the feel of the wool. I feel like I'm sculpting with wool. Oh, you sweet little bug, is that what you are? Go that way. Okay, so notice that as I'm laying it out, I'm pressing with my hands all the time. I use 3 senses as I'm laying out my wool. I use my sight, I use my touch, and I also use my ears, so I'm listening. Can you hear the difference between that? The difference is here is higher and here is lower. This means this is a little thinner than I want it to be. And we want to be aware of that. Even though you can only use it when you're doing the bottom layer, it helps you know when you feel the top layer how thick you want that to be if you're testing your bottom layer. Now, thus far, there are no designs in this wool. As we lay out this wool, this part of the wool is going to be the outside. You would never do this as you're laying out, but to show you, I'm going to do this. You can, one of the things that's difficult about this tray is we have a white tray. Can you see my hands through this? So you want to be watching, that's a little thin there. So we're using our eyes, we're using our ears, and we're using our hands. But I might want a design on this wool, and since this is the outside, I'm going to lay my design out first. I have a little bit of dark wool, and I'm going to lay that wool out. There are a number of ways that you can put designs on your bag. This is only one way, and we'll do another visit so that you can see the other ways to do a design. I'm just going to roll that up. And I'm going to put just some swirly designs on this because I don't want a plain white bag. I want a bag with swirly designs in the wool. Sometimes I do that, and then later on as I decorate, I can figure out what I want those designs to be. So I've put some little swirly designs in my wool here that I think will be really fun when I get my bag done at the end. I don't know what it's going to come out like, but I like it. So there we go. I've got some designs from another sheep, of course, who's not white like this sheep. This was Pepe. This other sheep that I'm working with, her name is Pamela, I believe. I believe this is Pamela's wool. So I'm going to lay that right back down on top of that. And we're going to see what happens there. Now I've only gone one direction. So the other direction that I want to go is crisscrossing it. I still see a few. Usually layout takes almost as long as the felting process. So we're going to pause this video while I finish laying out the up and down pattern, because I want to make sure you can see I've got thin spots here, thin spots here. You can see that with your eyes as you're looking. So we're going to pause the video right now. So as you can see, I've got my wool laid out in this direction, and I'm starting to lay wool out in this direction. I'm going to make about 3 layers, one in this direction, one in that direction, and the other in this direction. Notice as well that I've got wispy ends. Make sure you don't do blunt ends. I see a lot of students who are like going, oh, because they want to keep it right there. There will be a time for doing that pushing on the side, but not during layout. So I'll keep on doing this. So you'll notice that my pattern, or my wool, goes out beyond the pattern. I've been testing this pattern from time to time as I've been laying it out to make sure I'm laying it out right. Also, here's one of the hazards, and the wind has kindly been able to show you this right now, of laying out outside. The wind is our enemy. So laying out inside is often a lot easier because we don't want these fibers moved, and the wind will come blow your fibers as you've got them laid out exactly as you want them. I've felt it, I've looked at it, and got a little thick spot here, but that's going to be okay because I can feel with my hands how thick it's going to be. We don't want it to be too thick. Many early felters make it too thick. Now you'll notice though that there's a lot of loft here, so some early felters make it too thin. That's why you want to use more than one sense to decide how thick to make this. This is pretty lofty, but it has a lot of air in it. And so we're ready now to wet it down. Notice that I'm going to wet it down, and I pour it over my hand to diffuse that water. Some people will put a screen on now, and they will start to wet down their wool with a screen so they don't move the wool. I like to feel what my wool is doing. I'm going to use just a few drops of my biodegradable soap. I'm not going to be really worried about how much I use. This is very concentrated, so you don't need a lot. One of those should last you a long time. If you have wool that sticks to your hands, get your hands wet and put a little soap on your hands rather than on the wool, and then pour it over again. Now, one of the things that I do so that I don't get it overly wet and don't get it moving in ways I don't want it to move is I use my pattern as a way to wet down my wool. And so I'll press down on that pattern and wet it down. Not only does it make it so the wool doesn't move, but it also helps to wet down the wool underneath. You don't want to lift up this pattern too much. I'm going to put just a little bit more water underneath here for the wool to soak up. But all we're trying to do right now is wet down the wool during layout so that it takes its place. Now here's one of the tricks to making a bag or to making things to the layout. Remember you're sculpting with wool? We've got the flap to our bag right here. And we are going to literally sculpt with this wool to create the flap to this bag. So you notice that I've started to roll in this wool and to create the flap of the bag. There are some things to notice about how we do the layout. This is sculpting with wool, which means that you always are aware of the mechanics of the product that you're making. Hence, the crisscross pattern that we make creates a unique kind of strength with the fibers. And with the bag, I purposely go right over. Here's this edge over here, and here's this edge over here that I have purposely covered with the top flap part of my bag. And you fear that it's going to create a funny shape. But I promise it will not, and you'll see that as we go along. And then I'm just folding this right around my bag. So here's how we create an edge. We've already got fibers going this direction, and we have fibers going this direction. We're going to make those fibers wrap around those fibers that are going the other direction so we can create a nice blunt edge just like this. Look how I'm using my fingers to push and not fold. We never roll. We're not going to roll our fibers. We're going to lay them, we're going to fold them and lay them flat. So as I fold them and lay them flat, just like this, see how these thin fibers blend in with the top of this bag and with the flap of this bag? That will make a nice, even flap. Of course, we don't want anything to go over this part of our resist because we want it to be able to be open for us to use it. I've got water here. Now this water is not hot water, it's cool water. Wool felts faster with hot water, but my wool felts so quickly. I do not have my students start with warm water because I don't want them to have the wool that fast and have it get felt that fast and get away from them. My wool felt so fast that even as we speak, it's beginning to felt. Now we're ready to lay out the second half. Notice I have not wet this bottom half. I've only wet this top half and shaped the flap the way I want it to be shaped. I've got this going right over my resist, so I have it looking just like this. So as we do this, I'm going to tuck some of these wispy ends under. I don't have to use too many because I've made so much here that's wrapped around. I don't have to worry too much about this edge. I'm going to feel for, here's our dog food bag that works so well because it's so firm and flexible. I can feel where my resist is, and I can feel a little bit of padding between my resist and what I've wrapped around the edge. I'm going to put it right like this around the edges, and I'm going to make sure that I keep this like this so that it goes diagonally across that fold to add strength to it. Notice that I have a nice straight piece of wool that goes that way, and I'm going to now lay out the rest of the bag. As I lay out the edge of this bag, when I do my crisscross pattern, I'm going to make sure that I have wispies that stick out here because we're going to use those to wrap around and to create the opening edge of the bag. But first I'll lay crosswise, and then I'll come back to you in just a second when I'm laying the other way so you can see how I do the mouth of the bag. So you can see that I've got my wool all laid out on top. I have folded my fibers in, and now I laid it out in the crisscross pattern on the top. We're going to say no wind, don't blow. We don't want it to blow yet. Once we get it wet down, it can blow as much as it wants. But also notice that I have wispy fibers all the way around. I'm going to take these fibers, remember that my first layer had fibers running this way, and I'm going to roll them, gently roll them underneath those fibers that go across. That's going to create a blunt opening for our bag. These other fibers can go right around the corner, right over that corner of my resist. Okay, let's wet this down for just a minute here. And this is going to take a minute to wet it down. Notice that I'm making sure my hands don't stick. I've got a little tiny bit of soap on my hands. Thank you, Percy. Let me have some. Okay, and now we're going to wet everything down. It doesn't matter what we keep dry. When we're laying out, we want everything to remain dry. But once we start to wet down that whole project, we want it to remain, we want it all to get wet down. And this is a little stressful because see how the wool's sticking to my hands? We don't want that to happen. Now a lot of people would say, oh, just use a net. Once again, I like to be able to feel that wool. I like to be able to shape that wool. I like to know what that wool is doing under my hands. And so I'm going to wet it down and make things wet. And be prepared to get wet when you're doing this. This in the wintertime, don't do it outside. It's really cold and really nasty, right? But I'm going to wet it down, doing my very best. Notice how I use my fingers to shape that a little bit. Okay. And one of the other things to notice is, can you see the water that's here? See how it's already becoming dirty in the pan? Well, we're going to take that, and we're on a porch that you can flow right through. So I'm going to pour that water right off. It won't matter. It'll flow through the ground underneath our porch. And as we do so, we're getting rid of some of the dirt already that's in the wool. By the time you get through with this, there won't be any dirt in the wool at all. So give me just a moment while I finish wetting this down. Notice how I press with my hands and wet down now, and I'm able to do that. Oddly enough, it's felting right as we press. My wool felts that fast. So I'm just about all laid out. I'm making sure that I don't have anything that goes over my resist right here because that's where my opening is. And I don't want any flaps or funny places. And so we're looking for places where we might have bluntness. And I'm going to smooth that out. Now I'm going to do something that most people don't do with their wool. But if you have good felting wool, you can definitely do what I'm about to do. And this is why I don't like to use a screen. First of all, I'm not cutting, so I'm shaping right here what's going on. And I've put soap on my hands, so that's why my hands aren't sticking that much. I put a little soap on the wool and I put soap on my hands. At this point in time, you do not need to worry about how much soap is on your project. Some people will tell you that you do. No, you don't. We'll wash that soap out and get it out from between the fibers later. But right now, I want to know what's going on the other side. I've just tucked fibers in underneath here, and we don't want to have any blunt ends up against each other. So I'm going to take my piece and I'm going to flip that piece. It's a little messy when I do. It's okay. Look at this here. That's kind of ugly. So we're going to take this and we're going to just spread these fibers out. Sometimes I end up with this, sometimes I end up with nothing. But I always like to check. See, there's nothing there. But I always like to check, and very often, one of the good things about you seeing this is very often beginners do have those flaps. And so you want to be cautious to make sure. When you're making more complex articles, you're going to have to felt without making those little flaps, and we'll talk a little bit more about those later. But right now we're just doing a beginner article. So notice we have no screens that we're using. Now we are just about ready to start pressing the wool in place. And the first step to getting this wool to felt is that the wind also blows grass in once in a while too, doesn't it? I'm just picking it out. For the most part, don't pick out debris that you see in your wool until later, because what you do is you lift up your fiber. So I am already creating those blunt ends there. I put my hands like this, so I create a little corner here. I put my hand like this, so I create a little corner here. I use my fingers here. Every touch you make on your wool helps it to felt. Right now, while you're pressing your wool, you want to be aware of the shape of your wool. Now, right now, you're going to press for a while on your wool. Now, there is a way to press on this wool. Some people will press and they'll press outward. You want to be careful as you press that you always are aware of that resist underneath and have a gentle inward press for your wool. Okay? And so now you're going to press. One of the ways that I make sure that my wool is held up against my resist is that I'm pressing around the edge, just like that. I've got one hand here and one hand there, and it's making sure that I have a nice smooth edge. It's also making sure that I press up against that resist at all times. And you're just going to press like this on this side for quite a while. And I'm always with a gentle inward press, and then you're going to press on this side for quite a while, always watching those edges and making sure that you're shaping those edges. It may look like I'm folding right here, but I'm not. I'm only pressing. You never ever want to make a fold with a blunt edge. That will give you a very bad edge and a flap in what you make. Always make it a nice experience for you. If you feel like your hands are sticking too much to the wool, don't be afraid to put a little bit on your hands. We can always wash soap out later, but it should be pleasant for you to be pressing and doing that gentle inward press. I'm going to leave you now to press. This will take about an hour. If it gets too wet and you feel like the fibers are starting to float, pour some of that water off. It just gets rid of dirt. If you need more water, put water on. The idea is to just relax and feel good about what you're doing, daydream, chat with a friend, and I'll be back to show you the next step in felting now that you've got your bag all laid out. So join me again. Don't forget to subscribe.